the studio with us to discuss the nitty-gritty of structural engineering and the challenges Nigeria faces in this regard, especially with regards to building collapse, is Eddy Atumonyogo, President of the Building Collapse Prevention Guild and former President of the Nigerian Institution of Structural Engineers. Good to have you join us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so let's quickly start with the major causes of building collapses in Lagos State and in Nigeria in general. What would you say those are?
Yeah, before you can zero down on any one of them, you have to take a panoramic view of the building procurement process. So there are a lot of stakeholders. You have the clients, at times they cost. Then you have the design team that design the buildings, and then you have the government team that approves and monitors the building process. And then you have, of course, you have the government and you have the contractors that implement. You also have the maintenance team. If they refuse to keep to the regime of maintenance, it could also lead to building collapse. So it starts by the clients or the developers making sure they have the right professionals, competent, registered professionals, who have the knowledge and the skill to design these buildings, design safe buildings that can endure over a period of time. If you go to Broad Street, you see some of these buildings, they've been standing there for years because they were handled by competent professionals. And we have competent professionals in Nigeria who can do this. But most of these developers cut corners. They look for people who are not qualified or people who just came out from school who don't have the required skill and the knowledge, who should be in other offices learning how to do these things. So the client, once he makes that mistakes and gets people who cannot do this job, it's a problem. And then you now go to the approval authority. Now, buildings are getting very complex. Government do not have the required personnel. They have some personnel, but they're not enough. They need to partner with experienced consultants in the private sector to preview these designs and make sure they are safe, and also help them to monitor the construction process so there will be no compromise along the line. So if we do all these things, I think we'll have a safe environment. So any failure in any one of these things can lead to a collapse.
Mr. Atumonyogo, it seems like it's a synergy issue. Different agencies are not able to get all aligned with one another. But you said years back or decades back, Nigeria was putting up buildings without any issues. There weren't as many collapses. I'm wondering if the problem is more than just synergy. Could it be something more that we haven't explored? Because even if all the agencies get on one accord, there's still the issues with substandard materials being used. It's an integrity issue. How do you deal with those kinds of personality, human issues, especially since it has such dire consequences in your industry?
Okay, years back, there were competent people just like we have right now. And then on compliance, government was tough on compliance. Because all these issues of poor materials and all that, if you have competent professionals handling your project, they'll be able to dictate, because we have quality control and quality assurance systems. They'll be able to dictate these poor quality materials and then get them out of the system in your building. But the problem is, when we don't use competent professionals to handle the whole process, we will definitely have problems. When designs are faulty, the buildings will collapse. When designs are properly done and the developers, do away with the competent engineers and use quacks to implement their construction, the buildings will collapse. When government agencies look the other way while people are compromising the quality of the construction, buildings will collapse. So these are things that we need to tackle individually to make sure that we have a safe building environment.
Well, at the moment, there are a number of buildings in Lagos State, and shall I say in some other parts of Nigeria, that have structural defects. But people are still living in those buildings. What urgent measures should be taken to avert, a fatal collapse? Yeah, such things you have to evacuate. First of all, you have to evacuate people living in there, and they will do what we call structural integrity test. What it does is just to test the materials and know the strength of the materials. And based on the strength you get, you now redesign the building to see whether it can fulfill the purpose for which it was originally designed. If it cannot fulfill that purpose, you can design some strengthening schemes. You come up with schemes that will strengthen the building so that people can move back. But if it's a building that cannot be redeemed, then you cannot tell them to pull down the structure and rebuild. So these are issues. But the problem is that the governments at different levels are not really engaging the professionals.
That is the problem.
What would be your advice then to the government? How should they sort of tackle this problem? Especially in some of the reports that we saw leading up to our interview with yourself, there's talk of corruption, there's talk of bureaucratic bottlenecks, so how do you really address all of these issues?
We know that in Nigeria they have weaponized poverty. A lot of civil servants are not, they're in luck. We have professionals outside who have established firms, who have names to protect, and the name of their firms to protect. So government must partner with these professionals. We've been talking to Lagos State government since 2011 when we were established. The same story. They have not come to the table to discuss with us and implement some of the issues.
Sorry to cut in very quickly. Do they have to come to you? Why don't you go to them so that we can minimize the number of...
When you go to government, first of all, they have to give you a platform to discuss. But thank God, both the Lagos State governor and the deputy governor are built environment professionals. So we are trusting God that this time around, they'll open the door so that we can have a proper dialogue and make Lagos a very safe place.
And speaking of that dialogue, when the building collapsed in Ikoyi a few months back at Gerrard Road, we had quite a few professionals who came to discuss the tragedy. And something that kept coming up was the National Building Code. Now, to my understanding, it's some legislation that could help with the regulation or lack of regulation within the sector. I just wanted to ask you what your opinion of the National Building Code. Exactly what is it for us laymen who don't really understand what it is, and what is the difference between it existing and it actually being passed? Because to our understanding, it's something that hasn't been passed by the National Assembly.
Yeah, the National Building Code is like a planning law for the whole country.
Right.
That shows how the built environment should proceed. Setbacks, the process of building and all that. You just mentioned there. There are other codes, apart from National Building Code. There are codes we are using right now, but most of them are from UK and the European Union. So there are codes in practice, but it's important for national honor for us to have a National Building Code. So I wouldn't really say that because of the absence of the National Building Code that we're having collapse. Okay. Because there are codes in place that we can also use. But it's important that we have a National Building Code so that it can be operational, and it will also take into consideration some local conditions in our country. Because when you're using codes from Europe, they're talking about snow load and all that.
Different environment here.
The wind, the isoplate map is different from ours. Right. So we need to have national annexes to some of these codes so that we can implement them locally.
Well, you've talked a lot about what government needs to do or what government is not doing at the moment, but I'm also interested in what the engineering societies are doing. For instance, you were the former president of the Nigerian Institution of Structural Engineers. What are they doing, to prevent these type of tragedies?
What we do, because in most of these collapses, you'll never find any member of Nigerian Institution of Structural Engineers involved. We are the only institution among the engineering institutes that before you can qualify as a member, we have to give you a 7-hour open book examination that will test your experience. And the pass rate is about between 25% and 30%. Oh. So before you go through that grind, before you come for that examination, you must have worked under, you have been under tutelage of very competent structural engineers who will teach you, who hold your hands and teach you the nitty-gritty of structural engineering. So we are very, very tough on training, on examination, and certification. So with all this, we equip our members to be able to handle these, buildings without any problems.
Well, we would like to say thank you so much for joining us in the studio this afternoon, Mr. Atumonyogo. We would like to have you back sometime soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.